gold trails and ghost towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Well, welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee here for another discussion of the history of the Pacific Northwest. And today we head to Vancouver Island. As a former 25-year resident of Vancouver Island, I wondered when we were going to get around to this place.
I wasn't holding out, Mike, really I wasn't. We're going back to an area that's really your stamping grounds, not mine, although I've always had kind of a latent interest, and this is Cumberland. And Cumberland, of course, is one of the great coal mining towns, or was one of the great coal mining towns of Vancouver Island. No doubt about it at all. And it has kind of a checkered history, really, Mike. In 1888, they established a camp which they called Union. This is the Dunsmuir Company, okay? Essentially, James Dunsmuir, who took over from his father, Robert, not well liked in the area, but nevertheless they established this camp, and this is a great photograph of the camp.
This is Union.
This is a little place called Union.
And a kind of swampy, ugly place. You can tell it's a company town immediately.
Sure.
Look at every house the same. Some of them without chimneys, so that they weren't even heated.
Yeah. And what they realized, this was in a swampy area, and it wasn't really a very good place for a camp. So they moved but kind of southeast for only about half a mile, found about 100 acres, and believe it or not, the Dunsmuirs donated it, and so it became the town site, and they named the new town Cumberland. Now that was in 1893, so there's about a 5-year gap in there. But by 1891, people realized the coal was so superb that they should start moving in there. And of course, there was a newspaper, the Cumberland News was established then. By 1897, Cumberland itself is incorporated as a city. And by that time, it is really starting to roll, Mike.
Now, in the same location, there are all sorts of other coal mining encampments.
Sure.
I mean, this coal on the east coast of Vancouver Island, he has it in Nanaimo, in Lanceville, in Nanoose. I mean, this.
Sure. We have places like Puntledge and Bevan and Minto, and so there's Union, Bevan, Puntledge, Minto, and now Cumberland, which becomes the great town of that particular area, Mike. And it's very interesting because here you have a view taken about probably 1920s. This is when it's well established. This shows Dunsmuir Avenue and the center of Cumberland, as it did look at just about its height. And of course, the Dunsmuirs like to call it, Dunsmuir Avenue. But some of the people in Cumberland gave it a different name some years later, which we'll allude to.
All right, we'll do that. The location, east coast of Vancouver Island, Cumberland. Coal is the particular mineral of choice here, and we'll tell you the story of Cumberland right after this break. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We should call it Coal Trails today because we're talking coal, East Coast Island, and we've talked Nanaimo before, but this is Cumberland. It's a neat little city inland, just south of Courtenay and Comox and that area, up in that area. So 1897, it's incorporated. And does it grow fast?
Starts to blossom. They know the coal production goes up every year, and so inside of a few years, there are half a dozen hotels in town. The Waverly, which is we've got a photo of the Waverly here.
Isn't that a handsome, it's a handsome...
It is. It's quite an impressive structure, really. But it wasn't the only hotel. There was the Union, and there was the Eagle, and there was the Cumberland, there was the King George, and then there was the Vendome, which some people call the Bucket of Blood. And this is kind of interesting.
Do all mining towns have to have a place called the Bucket of Blood?
Yeah, well, most of them do. And actually, the Vendome was frequented by a lot of the Italian families and from Central Europe and Southern Europe. And it's quite a good hotel, actually. This, by the way, this image is what we call a mirror image, Mike.
It's reversed. We take a look in here, and you can get down to the calendar, but May, you can see, has been reversed.
Around.
A common problem when you're reproducing old glass negatives, I take it.
On a glass plate,
These guys had to sit still for this a long time. This is dark interior, and so do you think it's May? Do you think it was any special day, or was it every day it looked like that?
That bar has 15 people in the bar approximately. That would be steady for a mining town. And sometimes they went off the deep end. I mean, sometimes they literally wrecked the bar. But it didn't happen too often because usually the barkeep was capable of keeping order there.
Well, you were there for a long time too, and you didn't want to. You didn't want to get that reputation as being that kind of. Although these people, miners, were traditionally pretty tough customers.
Yeah, but they could only spend so much. Yeah, they were, and they you know, there were a number of different factions in the town. There's no doubt about that. But remember, the average miner was getting about $2.50 a day. That was the white miner. Now the Chinese miner was getting about $1 a day, Mike, and that's all. So the Chinese had to be very frugal. Indeed, they were. The white miner was a little more careless because, of course, your cost of living then was relatively nothing.
And I think the sheriff in town was getting paid, what, at $3.50 a day?
He was getting $3 a day, $90 a month. He worked 30 days a month if there was 30 days in the month, and worked 31 if there was 31. He got a little break in February, of course. And but he collected dog tags. He was the pound keeper. He was virtually everything. And in fact, one of the letters that came in from the chief of police in town, he suggested that perhaps they should consider a little raise over and above his $90 a month.
That would be
and you see,
fair.
Like all mining towns, Mike. I mean, I spent some time as a kid in a mining town, and virtually everybody had a nickname.
As a matter of fact, in 100 Spirited Years, the history of Cumberland, there are 2 full pages of nicknames that these people were called.
And Mike, that isn't all. There were probably 1,000 nicknames in Cumberland. These mining towns have an affection for nicknames, no doubt about it. There was Side Pocket Sam, and there was Pothole Pete, and Tom the Pig, and 4-Bit Johnny, and a whole bunch of names, and they go on and on and on. They didn't include the last names because some of them are less than complimentary, okay?
Some of these are less than complimentary, and they have included them here. I don't know who Tom the Pig might have been. Was Side Pocket Johnny just been a pool player, or was there a mining job that was a side pocketer?
I don't think so. I think Side Pocket refers to his prowess as a pool player.
Yeah, and of course, Carrot Watson, who I met in Cumberland, had big shock of red hair.
Sure.
Pothole got his, I think he carried around a pickup truck load of gravel and fixed the holes in the road. A reasonably pointless job in there. Monkey Face, Melon Head, let's see, Mrs. Denman Island. I wonder who Mrs. Denman Island was.
But you know, they weren't excluded to the whites.
Yes.
I mean, the Chinese had nicknames. There was one called Three-Fingered Jack and Jumbo. And
Jumbo, I've heard of,
And Jumbo was about 6'6" or 6'7", huge Chinese, probably from northern China. Here's a shot of Jumbo in his declining years outside his cabin in Cumberland. Later, he went to Vancouver and lived out his days there. And was badly beat up, but in his 80s by some punks in Vancouver, and spent 7 months in the hospital.
All right. So these persons, well, for example, Jumbo, the Chinese community in Cumberland, huge. Look at this picture. We've counted buildings, and we can see about 80, but there are probably another 20% on top of that.
I think so. I think there were probably over 100 buildings in that Chinatown, which is not very far, just a mile or so from Cumberland itself, and probably a population of Mike of somewhere between 800 and 1,000. The locals might say more, but I think if you look through the directories of British Columbia, probably around that. But the business district here, Mike, is quite impressive. Both sides of the street, jammed with businesses.
Look at
substantial.
Look at that boardwalk.
Sure.
There, you're a fiend for boardwalks.
Yeah.
There's lots of history falls through the cracks of a boardwalk.
The Americans picked up most of it in Cumberland, by the way. Before we had a law to protect it, they actually screened that town very, very well. Probably about 15 years ago, Mike. And so all the old signs of Cumberland are pretty well gone.
Yeah. But a huge town. Did any of the European miners ever go into Chinatown, or was east and west and never the twain shall meet? So
well, yeah, the only time they go into Chinatown was to pick up a little bit of illicit Chinese liquor, or to gamble in Chinatown, either Fan-Tan or one of the other gambling games. And they would have to be very, very careful. The Chinese are very fine gamblers.
All right. Now, there's some artifacts to take a look at here. When I saw this, I thought, this is brand new. This is a replica of something. This is a drink tray.
Yeah.
Silver Spring Brewery Limited, Victoria, BC. Yeah. This is so good. It's like it's brand new.
Well, they found a lot of the original patterns in an old building, and so they picked them up, and they've turned them into rather unique serving trays. And so, that is an original. That is an original.
Well, that is. It's got a hook on the back to hang it up, and
the tray itself isn't, but the pattern is, and the picture is.
Well, look at that. So that picture is an original from that date.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that phenomenal?
Yeah, it's great.
Who found those? Who was the brilliant prospector who came up with that?
I picked them up from an old dealer friend of mine in the Armstrong area.
Yeah, you're always so.
No, he's a dealer, and I paid a good price for it, and I usually do. But anyway, you know, the key to the town. I mean, coal was king. There's no doubt about it. And one of the major mines was the number 6, and here we have a photo of the number 6 mine. And on the outside, it looks pretty good. But this was very dangerous ground for the average miner, Mike. And when we look at the production, when the production started picking up in the number 6, the coal was magnificent, but the miners could actually hear the coal, the coal gases, the gases hissing out of the seams as they mined the coal. And you know, the record of this particular mine, especially in the early years, was pretty brutal. In 1901, they had an explosion that killed 64 men, 20 whites, 35 Chinese, and 9 Japanese miners. And only reason it didn't go over the 100 mark is because a guy called Walker, who was an overman. Now he wasn't fire boss.
What's an overman?
Overman is a guy who takes care of the workings underground, and he's over the fire bosses. They come next, and then the miners after that. And he had a kind of a sixth sense. He was able to follow fresh air, and a whole bunch of miners followed Walker out, and they owed their lives to him.
Because, I mean, not only if the explosion didn't get you, there was the products of combustion, carbon monoxide, all that was around.
Yeah.
What did they call that?
Afterdamp.
And that could have killed them, so he led them out.
Yeah, he let them out.
That's the number 6 mine.
Yeah.
So what they just called by number each shaft that they dug into the hillside.
Yeah, the major mines, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, and number 7.
This is number 5, another of the mines. They all look kind of the same.
Yeah.
Was there inter-mine rivalry? I mean, did number 6 go up against number 5 in the hockey games or the baseball games? Or
No.
No?
They went up against the other mining towns. There's no doubt about it. There was terrific rivalry between Minto and Bevan, especially in soccer and so on. So they, so there was a lot of rivalry, especially in soccer, because a lot of these people were old country soccer players.
Now, I want to show you this because this is kind of neat. You've picked this up somewhere. The Sylvester Cup.
Yeah, it's sterling silver.
The Sylvester Cup was given to Vancouver Island Colliery's Athletic Sports Supremacy for annual competition for the Football League. So would this be soccer?
This would be soccer, of
course.
Soccer,
football.
Of course.
And so probably, very probably, Cumberland would go up against Nanaimo and for this treasured cup.
And some magnificent athletes out of Cumberland. The one I remember when I was a kid was Terry Tobacco, who was a very, very fine runner, went to the Empire Games, Commonwealth Games now, then, and then 54 and 50, I think somewhere in there.
Yeah. And so these capable people enjoyed an occasional moment of levity and a little physical activity.
They played every sport. I think Robbie Thoburn, if I remember correctly, who was 72 when they had an exhibition soccer game, he was running hard at 72, and that was in 1988. I don't know whether he's still there or not, but he was sure running hard then. It was great.
You know, but as hard as these guys worked, I always think to myself they had to go back underground, and there were more disasters than that one. These ones show buildings above ground just shattered.
Yeah, this is October the 16th, 1908. And this, and of course, great photographs. The first one shows a bunch of kids there. They're looking at. They can't stay away from the explosion. But the town was badly served by some of those mines. Total of 305 miners were killed in the Cumberland area over the years. Most of those by explosions or afterdamp or accidents in the mine itself.
Rock falls of one kind or another. Yeah. I mean, ventilation must have been a necessity in one of these kind of operations.
And the Dunsmuirs were pretty slow in ventilating between 5 and 6 and some of the other mines. But that wasn't the only disaster. I mean, there were other disasters there. It wasn't strictly in the coal mines. There were lesser disasters, and one of the lesser disasters was really quite spectacular. One of the locomotives plunged through a trestle in 1898 and carried with it 5 individuals. By the way, 6. 5 of whom were killed, and one survived miraculously.
Now, this is something you got to know where Cumberland is. It's inland, so all of the coal that it produced was shipped out by train to the coast.
That's right.
When you drive up Vancouver Island today, you see these long piers, and those were the piers that went out to the colliers to dump it into the ships.
Yeah, and sometimes the colliers made regular stops. There were captains on some of those ships coming up that wouldn't go anywhere except to get the coal out of Cumberland. They said the coal was that good in Cumberland, they could tell how the engines worked. And in fact, a classic example, some people lost their lives on precisely that when I think it was December the 16th or 17th, 15th or 16th of 1900, and a ship was coming through, a ship called the Alpha, was steaming up past Yellow Point, heading for Union Bay, and ran into a dense fog and high seas, and got caught up in a reef, and there were a number of people on the ship, and the first mate was a guy called Wilkinson, And he looked at it. He knew they were in deep trouble. The ship was starting to break up, he felt. And there was a sailor there called Hansen who was very quick, and he noticed the waves were going up in this reef and then coming back. And he timed the length of the waves and the time he had. He jumped overboard with a line, jumped up on shore, ran up, a wave caught him, threw him into a crevice, didn't knock him out. That's how tough he was. He got up, secured the line, and so people could slide out of the ship. And most of them did. And the last guy to go was Wilkinson. They lost one person, by the way. And
in the escape, getting off the ship.
Yeah, on the line, on the high line. And Wilkinson stayed back to tell the captain, a guy named York, and his brother, and I think 6 or 7 others, and said, look, you've got to get off. He said, I've got to go. The ship's breaking up. They wouldn't move. They said the ship would hold. So Wilkinson, first mate, took off. He was saved. Ship broke up a little while later. All of them perished. Nothing left at all.
That was the Alpha en route to Cumberland or Union Bay, which was the port facility to handle all of the coal from there. I mean, when I think of this, you know, the industry associated with that. I mean, you had the railway, you had a merchant marine, you had the collieries, the ships that carried the coal.
And serviced by the Union steamships, of course, again. And Union steamships, and you have a number of ships. You know, this is the SS Mary and Princess Mary, and some of the others were really quite magnificent ships, and very very attractive ships.
I mean, would they bring miners in? Who would take them? I mean,
well, they'd bring business people in. Remember, the road system wasn't very good, in some places almost non-existent, Mike. It was only by railroad, so the ships had they had quite a service to perform on all that East Coast.
All right. Going to take a break here because there are more stories to tell and we have to catch our breath, but we'll be back to talk about Cumberland right after these words. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Today talking about a coal town by the name of Cumberland on Vancouver Island. As we talked about, the mines were dangerous, but they were productive. This was the finest coal, really in the British Empire, some people felt.
Some people said that, and you know, when you look at the production coming out of Cumberland, Mike, all those years had, after 1900 virtually, had hundreds of thousands of tons. The top years were 1910, over 500,000 tons produced. Then 1913, over 500,000 tons produced. 1919, over 500,000 tons produced. Really quite, and you know, there were problems. I mean, the Dunsmuirs were not good bosses. And yet Robert Dunsmuir, the father of the dynasty, had been a coal miner. But he seemed to forget about that when he became, at that time, a multimillionaire, which was really quite unusual. And so there were work stoppages and there were strikes and there were problems. And of course the unions came in and tried to unionize. And certainly, I guess the most prominent name in Cumberland today is Ginger Goodwin. And Ginger Goodwin was a union organizer who came in there during World War I, volunteered for service in World War I, was turned down by the medical examiners and said, no, you cannot serve because of a physical disability. And so he assumed that was correct. They went back to union organizing. And then they found after a while, when he was organizing fairly effectively in the area of Cumberland and Minto and so on, that maybe he was fit for service in World War I. And so they advised him that he should go back in and enlist. He decided not to. He felt that it was perhaps a put-up job, and he stayed out of sight. The Dominion government sent in some constables to pick him up, not the Northwest Mounted Police or the Royal Northwest at that time. They sent in what we call a Dominion constable, and a guy called Dan Campbell was tipped off to where Ginger Goodwin was staying, and arrested him, and then said he shot Ginger Goodwin in self-defense. Well, it was very unlikely because there was significant evidence that Ginger Goodwin was shot in the back, and he did not survive. And here's a picture of Ginger Goodwin in the Cumberland area, taken by one of the miners' wives who took a picture of Ginger Goodwin at that time. And so his funeral procession was the largest in the country, Mike, in that part of the country. Thousands and thousands of mourners came out. And this photograph from the Cumberland Museum gives you an example of the esteem in which he was held. And there's his coffin being carried by his miners and his peers.
That is
a
line miles long.
Literally miles long. They came from all over, from Nanaimo, from Comox, from Minto, from Pantelage, all over the place.
Now, assassination is a harsh word. We've only mentioned it one other time in the connection with Tomat, the constable, the sheriff in Midway, wasn't it, who was gunned down by some enemies?
Yeah.
Was the word
and Hamill in the East Kootenays was gunned down too by
now,
Spruill.
was the word assassination applied to this?
His original gravestone had the word murdered on it. Today it has the word killed on it. But when you go to Miners' Day in Cumberland, and I try to make it every few years, you will find that there are some people in town who still don't like the name Dunsmuir on Dunsmuir Avenue, and they will paste that out and put over Goodwin Avenue. Now that's actually done, the only place I know of in British Columbia where the feeling is still that strong.
I guess the prices, the costs associated with union contracts and stuff, was that serious a thing?
Yeah.
Was any implication made that this had been a hired hit, or with any of the language we use today?
Of course, the union said that it was indeed, and it was actually 1936 before the unions were able to get a contract in Cumberland, and that's 40 years later.
And Goodwin was killed in 1918.
1918. Yeah. So it was 18 years later, Mike.
What an interesting story. Yeah. That's a black story, isn't it, on the history of British Columbia?
Yeah, it is. But lots of people came out of Cumberland. I'm pretty impressed with the people there yet. It's one of these kind of high mountain towns, and it's a mining camp, and different than the towns I was brought up in, which were lode mining camps, and they were gold and silver and so on. But it's really quite fascinating, and of course a generation of miners went through there, and a lot of well-known names actually came out of Cumberland.
Got a couple of little tiny artifacts here. The size of the artifact does not necessarily mean anything as far as how important it is.
Yeah.
These, they look like any kind of tag you could get to identify a bus locker, but what in fact are these tags?
Well, they're miners' tags. They had to wear those when they went on shift. And the reason is, Mike, if they were caught in an explosion, if the explosion was so severe, they didn't know who was killed and who escaped. So that would be around their neck or in the immediate vicinity. Then they'd check number 206 or number 177. They would know exactly which miner that was, because miners never traded their tags.
Gee, this is number 249, and it's burned, and I wonder, do you know anything of its provenance?
Can't tell you, Mike. I really can't tell you. Most of my artifacts have provenance. I know where that came from. I know where the tin came from. I know where the
hat came
the hat came from, and I know where virtually everything came from. That I can't tell you. I can't tell you the name of the miner.
All right. Interesting story. Cumberland on Vancouver Island, the mineral of choice, the gold they were after was coal, king coal, and it was, by all accounts, the finest coal in the British Empire. And the story of Cumberland is one that if you were to drop around on Vancouver Island, you head north from Nanaimo, nearly to Courtenay, hang a left and head west into the interior of Vancouver Island. You head up toward the Comox Lakes, and you'll find Cumberland. And to this day, they celebrate these events. Miners' Day is up there, and a very interesting trip. And today we've looked at Cumberland. We'll see you next time on Gold Trails.